In June of 1906, John Joseph Keene was 42 years old and $320 away from prison. He was not a violent man. He was not a stranger to the neighborhood. He was polite, well-spoken, and well-dressed. He had a wife, 3 children, and a house on North Horton Street in Philadelphia. He was born in New York City, where he had worked in a stockbroker's office. He came to Philadelphia about 10 years earlier and took a job renting out properties for a landlord. The newspapers later called him something of a mathematical talent, and he had taken $320 that did not belong to him, roughly $10,000 in today's money. Not a fortune, just enough to finish him. His employer already knew. The terms were simple. Put it back or go to the penitentiary. Now here is the part that never sits right. Keene had been rich, twice. The papers summed up his entire life in one sentence. He had stolen one fortune, earned another, and lost both of them at the racetrack. So this was a man who had held real money in his hands, more than once, and watched it go. And now $320 stood between him and a cell. On Sunday the 10th of June, he went walking down Columbia Avenue, and he found his answer sitting in a shop window. If forgotten cases like this one are your kind of thing, hit subscribe before we go further. What the Philadelphia police did 6 days later has almost no equal in American history. There was a jewelry store on Columbia Avenue. Charles Muth owned it. The family lived in the rooms above the shop, which was normal then. In the window, where the light was good, sat a small boy. Keene stopped walking. A voice called out from inside the store. "Now don't you go away, Freddie." Keene later described the exact thought that landed in his head. He said it occurred to him how much they would give to get the boy back. If he did go away. The boy was Charles Frederick Muth. Everyone called him Freddie. He was 7 years old. Keene did not act that day. He did something worse. He spent Monday doing research. By that evening, he knew the family lived above their own shop. He knew both parents were alive. He knew the name of Freddie's school. He knew the name of the principal. He tried something first, and this rarely gets mentioned. He went to the Muth house on Monday hoping to find the boy outside alone. His plan, in his own words, was to offer him candy and walk away with him. Freddie was not there. So Keene went across town and spent the rest of that day looking for somebody else to do it for him. A stranger, a partner, anyone. He wanted the child taken by another pair of hands. Then he would arrive later as a helpful gentleman with information and collect a reward from the grateful father. He could not find one person willing, which left him with a single option. Tuesday, the 12th of June. Keene went to the post office and wrote a note. Then he hired a messenger boy with freckles who had no idea what he was carrying and sent him to Freddie's school. The messenger asked for Miss Ring, the principal. She read the note closely. It said Freddie's mother was seriously ill. It said his father was already at the hospital with her. It said the messenger had been sent to bring Freddie to them. Sit with how well built that is. It explains why a stranger has come. It explains the rush. It explains why neither parent came in person. And it quietly removes the one thing that would have saved the day. Nobody thought to telephone the house. The house was supposed to be empty. Miss Ring went to the classroom. She spoke quietly with the teacher and showed her the note. Then the two women took Freddie aside and told him, as gently as adults tell children terrible things, that his mother was very sick. He gathered his things. Two careful women, both doing exactly what they had been trained to do, walked a 7-year-old to the door and handed him to a stranger. The messenger took him a few blocks and left him on a corner where a well-spoken man was waiting. Then the messenger went back to work, and Freddie Muth was gone. What happened over the next few hours makes almost no sense, which is exactly why this case has never sat comfortably where people file it. Keene took the boy to Broad Street Station and bought him picture books. They sat there together for half an hour. Then he took him to Keith's Theater, and they watched a full variety show that ran until 10:30 at night. At some point during that show, Keene slipped out to a telephone and called the Muth home. Mrs. Muth answered. He told her Freddie was nearby. He told her the boy would be home within the hour. By his own later account, he was already trying to end this thing before it properly began. And then Mrs. Muth turned away from the receiver and called out to her husband, "Here's the man that has Freddie." Keene heard a man's voice coming toward the phone. He panicked. He hung up. That hang-up is the hinge of this entire case. Before the call, he had a child in a theater and a way out. After it, he had something he could never explain away. They went to an automat on Chestnut Street and he bought the boy food. Then they rode streetcars for hours, nowhere in particular, just moving. They ended up in West Philadelphia and stopped at an oyster house, where Keene ordered coffee. Freddie was cold, so Keene gave him his own hat and coat. Around 3 in the morning, Keene crept into his own house while his wife slept. He took a pillow, an old chair cushion, and some clothes. He never woke her. He never said a word. And now the detail that decided everything. Keene rented out empty properties for a living. He carried keys to every vacant house on the block. He walked Freddie into one of them, put the cushion down, and let him sleep. Nobody in the city had any idea. But 4 hours earlier, something had already landed on the Muth's doormat. At 11:20 that night, Charles Muth received a letter written on a torn piece of brown wrapping paper. It had been posted in Philadelphia at 10:50. It said his boy would be placed in his hands the next morning. It said there was no good in exciting the neighbors or the police. It told him to hold himself in check until then. Mr. Muth had already gone to the police. And here the case turns in a way I did not expect. I assumed 1906 policing would be useless. It was not. Within hours they had a prime suspect. Keene had been seen with the boy at 3 or 4 separate points across the city. A well-dressed man leading a small child around train stations and theaters draws more eyes than he planned for. He was already known to them. He had taken $20,000 from a Harlem bank back in 1901. Detectives compared the handwriting on the school note and the wrapping paper. Same hand. Confident match. They found his employer, who confirmed the debt and the ultimatum. Then they went to see Mrs. Keene and told her that her husband was suspected of taking several $100s. She was not especially alarmed. She said she had assumed he had run off with another woman, so the police knew exactly who had the boy. What they could not risk guessing at was where. The next morning, Freddie did not come home. Another letter did, this one posted from Wilmington. The tone had shifted. It accepted an offer of $1,000. It gave instructions about folding banknotes into a newspaper and leaving them at an address on North Front Street. It warned that every move the family made was being watched. Then it closed with a line built to sit in a parent's chest and stay there. Hold your silence, and in 40 hours you will have the boy home. By that morning, Freddie Muth was on front pages across Pennsylvania and into New York, which was the worst thing that could have happened, because the papers reached straight for the one comparison every Philadelphia parent feared. In 1874, in Germantown, a 4-year-old named Charlie Ross was lured into a carriage with the promise of candy and fireworks. His family received 23 letters. His father spent the rest of his life and most of his money searching. Nearly 700,000 notices went out across the country. Charlie Ross never came home. Nobody ever learned what became of him. 32 years later, the Philadelphia headline was more or less this: "We have another Charlie Ross." John Keene read those headlines in an empty house, with somebody else's child asleep on a cushion, and he started to come apart. He wanted money. He did not want to be the most wanted man in America, and a man who is coming apart writes things down. His next letter arrived on the 15th of June. He accused the family of having people arrested. He complained that the papers were full of their business. He claimed the boy was unwell and would not last a week if the noise continued. Then he gave instructions. Tell the newspapers Freddie was safe with relatives in New Brunswick. Tell them the whole thing had been an unfortunate mistake. Make the story stick. He enclosed 2 things. The first was a scrap of yellow paper covered in a child's handwriting. Homework. Freddie had been anxious to do his schoolwork on that first day away and had asked to be allowed to. 2 of the words on it were squirrel and jump. Charles Muth knew his son's hand instantly. Detectives believed it had been included as proof the boy was alive, and it was the only such proof the family ever received. The second enclosure came with no note attached. None was needed. It was a newspaper clipping, only a day or 2 old. It concerned another child, from another Pennsylvania town, who had gone missing months earlier. A reward had gone unclaimed. Detectives had followed a trail that went cold. She had been found. She never came home. The Muths understood the message perfectly, and so did Captain James Donaghy, who now had a decision in front of him that no police officer should ever have to make. First, the search. The police knew Keene had not been home all week. They knew what he did for a living, and somebody made the connection that breaks this case open. A rental agent has keys. Detectives began working through vacant properties across the city, block by block, door by door. They went to the barber shops too. Keene wore a distinctive pointed beard, and a man in hiding shaves. Every barber in Philadelphia was asked the same question. Then the letters stopped making sense. A new one arrived under a false name. It demanded $200, down from $1,000, left near an engine house at 9 that night. It carried 3 separate postscripts, each one signed again with the same fake name, each one contradicting the last. Burn these letters. Do not delay. Everything today points to a sellout. A man in control does not write 3 postscripts. When no reply appeared in the afternoon papers, Keene did something stranger still. He wrote to a druggist named William Gano, who lived a few doors from the Muths, and asked him to hand-deliver the enclosed letter personally, in case the first had been lost in the flood of mail. Mr. Gano did not open it. He ran it down the street himself. It was the last letter Keene ever wrote. In it, he no longer named a price at all. He demanded that the Muths publicly call the police off, announce it had all been a family misunderstanding, promise not to prosecute. Then, he said, the boy would come back through Mr. Muth's own sister in New Brunswick. He knew her name too. He had researched that as well. Detectives read it and understood the arithmetic. The demands were shrinking. The instructions were unraveling. The man was cornered, frightened, and holding a 7-year-old. They had to find Freddie fast, and they had to do it while appearing to stop looking, which is how Captain Donaghy ended up asking a father to destroy his own name. He went to see Charles Muth and told him plainly. The plan required Mr. Muth to be held up in the newspapers as a fraud and a faker who had deceived the police for reasons of his own. Donaghy warned him what that would cost. Muth's answer has stayed in print for over a century. He told Donaghy to say anything he pleased about him, blacken his character, mix him up with a woman, make him any kind of criminal they liked. Just find my boy, he said. The papers can say whatever they want. Donaghy called the newspaper editors to City Hall and asked them, out loud, to print a deliberate fake story. He laid out the evidence. He told them what he believed would happen to Freddie if the pressure did not appear to break in the kidnapper's favor. Print that Muth has been fooling us all along, he said. Print that we have thrown up the case in disgust, and work in the words New Brunswick and Brooklyn, so the man reading it knows his letter arrived. Every paper ran it. Charles Muth woke the next morning as the most despised man in Philadelphia. Neighbors would not speak to him. Men who had never met him said he deserved a public beating. The police had a name for the maneuver. They called it a throw-off. And in an empty house in West Philadelphia, John Keene opened a newspaper and felt the walls come down. The hunt was over. He had won. He had also come closer to being caught than he knew. Special agents Clear and Bale had already searched that row of empty houses. Keene heard them coming. He heard them moving through the rooms below. He pushed Freddie up onto the roof until they left. Then, with the confidence of a man who has watched a search fail, he moved the boy into the house they had just finished searching. For reasons nobody has ever fully explained, the 2 agents came back the following day. Clear stayed at the front. Bale climbed onto the roof, and there, on the flat roof of an empty house, sat a small, filthy, exhausted boy. Bale kept his voice light. He said hello. He asked, as though it were the most ordinary question in the world, whether that was Freddie Muth. The boy said yes. Then he burst into tears. Down at street level, Clear caught sight of a face at one of the windows. Keene ran. It did not last long. He put his hands up and gave himself in. The first thing out of his mouth was that he had not hurt the boy. And within a day he would say something nobody in that room saw coming. 6 days. That is how long Freddie Muth was gone. When they searched Keene, everything he owned in the world came to almost nothing. 1 nickel, an old spoon, a stamped envelope and a sheet of paper. He had been slipping out at night to take milk and food from doorsteps in the neighborhood while the boy slept. His confession was long and full of small self-justifications. He described the picture books, the theater, the automat, the streetcars, the coat he gave the boy. He explained how he had kept Freddie quiet. He told him the rental agent was coming and that they would both be in trouble for being inside the house. He admitted giving the child things to drink that no 7-year-old should be given, because the empty house had no water. Then, without being asked, he volunteered something nobody had suspected. About 2 weeks earlier, he said, he had sent a boy to another address to try to lure away a 5-year-old named Philip Koloski. He had heard the child's mother boast of having plenty of money. He tried twice. He failed both times. And one of the bottles of milk he took from a doorstep to feed Freddie Muth came from the Koloski's front step. Freddie was never the plan. He was the second choice. Keene was watched all that night. Not one relative came, not one friend. The officer at his cell listened to him pace until morning, asking the empty air why he had done it, what would become of his wife, what his mother and his brothers and sisters would think of him now. His wife announced she was taking their 3 children and leaving the city. And then the law moved at a speed that is genuinely hard to imagine today. At the hearing, Keene looked like a man who had been sleeping in an abandoned building for a week, which he had. Freddie arrived scrubbed and brushed, in a fresh blue sailor suit, hair combed, a red rose pinned to his chest. The reporters could not stop writing about the contrast. The magistrate declined to swear the child in. He asked Freddie whether he knew the man in the dock. The boy hesitated and shook his head. Then Keene leaned over the rail and asked, almost pleading, whether Freddie didn't know him, and the boy said yes. The magistrate asked whether the man had struck him. Freddie said no. He was pressed on it, and he did not budge. No, he said, he didn't hit me. Keene was invited to question the child. Instead, he began listing his own kindnesses. The books, the theater, the candy, the telephone call. The magistrate cut him off. He told Keene that if the law allowed it, he would gather the largest crowd of mothers he could find and turn him loose in the middle of it. By 11:15 that same morning, a grand jury had indicted him. His trial began immediately. Asked how he pleaded, he said he was not guilty in one sense. Then he stammered. Then he said guilty. At 12:25, the judge sentenced him to 20 years at hard labor in the Eastern Penitentiary. The whole thing took about 2 hours. But it was a question asked 9 years later that gave this story its real ending. Keene applied to the state board for a pardon in 1915. He had served over 9 years. The board asked Freddie Muth what he thought about it. He was 16 by then. Freddie said he didn't care one way or the other. The board refused. The last record anyone has found of John J. Keene comes from 1920, 14 years after that week in June. He was still inside. Freddie Muth lived until 1977. He got the whole rest of a century, and there is no sign he ever spoke publicly about the 6 days that made him famous at 7 years old. $320. That is what all of this was for. A debt smaller than a month's rent today. It put one boy on a rooftop, another boy on a list, and a father in front of an entire city that had been told to hate him. And the father said yes anyway. A name can be dragged through the mud and washed clean again. Only one thing in that room could not be replaced, and Charles Muth knew exactly which one it was. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments what you would have said in Muth's chair. I suspect that answer is harder than it looks. There are more forgotten cases like this one waiting for you on the channel.